Hello, my name is Philip Edu. I'm one of the methodology experts at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Today I'm going to present on using literature review to support qualitative research methodology, decision, and actions. And also thinking about identifying best practices in qualitative research and trying to use those best practices to communicate the actions that you're going to take in your study. And during this presentation, you can stop me anywhere and ask me questions, and I'll be happy to address them for you. And you can also type in your questions, and Dr. Morris will be reading them to me. So this is the outline. And as you are aware, this week is literature review. So you're expected to look into the literature and find out what is really have been done in your area and trying to communicate those information to your readers or your audience. And so I will just give a brief information about the essence of literature review and also talk about the goals of incorporating literature review into your qualitative methodology. And I'll talk about specific strategies, about 3 strategies of utilizing existing qualitative studies and best practices as we try to, communicate what you want to do in your study and also what tools you are going to use in terms of methodology. And I'll talk about 4 main areas related to methodology. There are a lot of areas, but because of time, I will just focus on these 4 main areas and explain. And as I said, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll be happy to address them for you. Let's start with the essence of literature review. So, as you are aware, I know that you have identified your topic. You are thinking about, the essence of doing research is contributing to the field, but you cannot effectively contribute to the field without knowing what has been done. So the essence is to educate your readers about your topic. Your readers might know a little bit about your topic in terms of maybe what findings and areas that needs to be researched on. And so it's your responsibility as a researcher to educate your readers about what you want to focus on, right? And you can use existing studies to educate your readers or your audience. And it's also a way of connecting your study to what has been done. You cannot do your study in isolation. You have to do some kind of connection, and so that there will be a continuity of ideas, and people are also going to learn from you as you also connect to what has been done. And it's also a way of justifying your focus. People are going to ask you, why are you focusing on this topic? And also, it's also a way of identifying a gap in the literature, right? So you identify a gap and then you tell your audience, okay, this is the gap that I've identified and this is what I'm going to do in my study to fill those gaps, or if you have only one gap. So at the end of the day, you want to adequately contribute to the field. So you have to look into what has been done. The same thing is done with the methodology aspect. But before I talk about that, I just want to give you a brief information about the gaps that you can identify in your literature. Sometimes there is a competing explanation concerning an issue, and your focus will be trying to identify the competing explanations and trying to do research to maybe clarify or see which explanation is maybe right empirically. And it is another way of spotting a gap is to look into the literature and see what researchers have not focused on. There might be an area that has been overlooked, or the area that has not been researched, and there's no empirical evidence to support maybe some researchers' assertions, and you want to do the research to try to help your audience or readers to learn more about area that's um, has been overlooked. And also the fourth and the third one is application spotting. So this means that sometimes you want to expand on what has been done. Maybe you look at a study and then the end of the end of the presentation of the study by a researcher, they provide or he or she provides information about what needs to be done next. So you're going to do a research to try to expand or maybe complement the existing information that is out there. The last one is sometimes when you look at a study and realize that maybe there's a problem with the methodology. Maybe they use quantitative approach, and you think that maybe qualitative approach would be better, right? In looking deep into that issue. Yes, you can do a research and use a different methodology and see what you're going to find, and maybe you can compare and contrast your findings with the existing study. So these are the four areas that you could identify a gap. But coming back to our focus today, so somebody might ask, why should you even review literature for in terms of methodology? Why should you do that? In presenting your methodology, you are telling the audience the decision that you want to make in terms of collecting data, in terms of identifying a specific methodology, in terms of analyzing your data that you're going to collect. All these decisions, I think, is very important for you to look into what has been done or what kind of strategies that previous researchers use so that you can learn from it, and based on that, you'll be able to communicate what you want to do better to your audience. And it's a way also showing to the readers about the source of decision and the actions that you take. So if you say that I want to use phenomenological approach because I want to better understand the experiences of participants, then you can cite a source to support that decision or the justification. And when you do that, if your readers want to learn more about your approach or your strategy, they can refer to the references and then go and read more about it. Right. So that's the essence of, or that's the goal of reviewing literature and incorporating them into your methodology section. And it's a way of also justifying your decision. People are going to ask you, why are you using grounded theory? Why not phenomenological approach? Why not narrative? In justifying your decision, people want to make sure that you are using existing decisions that already been taken by previous researchers to support. So you can say researcher A did a similar study and then they used this approach, and I think that they came up with very good result, and I think that this is the best approach for me to use. And the last one that you have to think about the goal is to enhance the credibility. When it comes to qualitative study, it's a subjective experience. You decide what approach you want to use. You decide who you want to talk to. You decide the kind of question that you're going to ask participants. You decide how you're going to analyze your data. You decide how you're going to present your findings. It's only you. It's a private experience. And in order for you to justify, to enhance the study, it's very important for you to try to link your decisions to previous practices. And I think that people will believe or will trust your findings, because especially when you're analyzing your data, and people are going to ask you, so what steps are you taking? You can say that I'm taking these steps recommended by Mustakast or recommended that by this qualitative researcher. And then you cite the source, and they can go and refer to that information. And they can say, okay, I think this information, the process is well thought through, right? So it's a way of enhancing the credibility of your study and also your findings. There are three main strategies that you can utilize existing qualitative studies or practices. The first one is, adopting the best practices. So what you have to do is just, look into the literature. You can look at into textbooks related to the area that you have selected or related to the methodology that you have chosen, and you search and select some of the actions or practices that they use to, and then if you think that those practices will be consistent with your approach, you can adopt that and cite the source, right? And another way is to describe your actions and then try to cite literature that mirrors your actions, right? So let's say you want to use granite theory. You can describe what granite theory is all about, and then you cite a source, a book or an article that talks about granite theory. And the third approach is also justifying your decisions, right? I think I've talked about it. So making reference to previous articles and maybe textbook to support your actions. It doesn't mean that you should educate people about specific issues that has um, little relationship with what you want to do, right? One example is, let's say you are doing a qualitative study and then you are doing phenomenological, you're using phenomenological approach. You just have to describe what phenomenological approach is all about, and maybe talk about maybe the strength and why you think phenomenological approach will be the best. You don't have to go into issue of the reason why you are using qualitative approach and the different types of qualitative approach that they have, and why, and talk about quantitative approach and why quantitative approach is not appropriate. If they want more information, they can read textbook. Your information here is not talking about things that has not that are not directly related to your actions. People want to know, what are you going to do, and why do you think those actions are appropriate? That's what people don't want to know. They don't want any information about long description of specific concepts or a different approach that has nothing to do with what you want to do.
Dr. Adu, can I jump in for a second on this?
Yes.
I think it's a really good point. There definitely, when we look at published scholarship and research, most times you don't see an elaborate conversation or discussion about, here are the multiple types of case study that you could possibly choose, and here's the one I selected, and here's why this one particularly is important. So that is not common practice in academic writing or in peer-reviewed research. However, I think in the dissertation manual and proposal template that our institution uses, I think it encourages students to do that. So there's a space in there to ask them to justify. So there's some good practice in that, and I think it's part of tying it back to some of this coursework where you're really demonstrating that you understand the approach 100%. But you're absolutely right that it is not a common practice outside of the academic exercise of doing that.
Yes, I completely agree. Sometimes based on the requirement of the assignment or the research that you're doing, if they ask that, if your chair specifically asks you to do that, I always tell students your chair has the final say, right? We are there to give suggestions. So if your chair thinks that is important, especially they want to know whether you also have critically analyzed other approach and trying to assess the strengths and the weaknesses of other approach before you come into conclusion that this specific approach will be appropriate, right? So I think that it all depends on the requirement of the assignment and also the expectation of the student's chair, and so I agree. So let's talk about the 4 areas. The first one is the research method, right? So your expectation is that readers want to know what the method is all about, right? Specific method that you're using, what is it all about? Why do you think it's appropriate for you to use that method that you have selected for your study? And when it comes to data source, they want to know appropriate data source consistent with the approach that you are using, and what is the sample size, and also the sample strategy that you want to use, right? And then the next one is the data collection. People want to know specific appropriate strategy that you want to use to collect your data. And then they want you to present step by step. How are you going to collect your data? What specific action are you going to take? What specific actions participants are going to take? What is the research location? All come together to form the data collection process. And the last one is the data analysis. So after you have collected your data, what do you have to do about it? So the data analysis, you just think about it as just a summary of what you have collected from participants, but not just a summary. You have to demonstrate how you summarize the data to your audience. So you have to show them step by step how you coded the data, how you categorize them, how to develop themes, and how the themes are representing the data that you collected, and also addressing the research question that you have. So that's the data analysis process. So let's start with the research approach. Narrative is all about describing participant experience or describing their story. So you are narrating participant experience, you are telling the story on behalf of participants. And phenomenological approach is all about experience. Participant have passed through some experience, and then you as a researcher interview them, collect those information, right? And it can be two types. Maybe you can collect their experience. They are describing the experience to you, or you are collecting their perception or reaction to their experience. And then collect that information, analyze, bring out the essence of that experience and use it to address your research question that you have. Case study. A case, think about it, that is descriptive. It can be a concept, it can be a location, it can be an issue, it can be a group of, information, or a group of cases, right? So you can either examine the case, maybe you want to better understand the case, but you have to collect multiple data. The unique part of case study is that you collect more than one data, right? To maybe understand the issue, or maybe describe an issue that people may not be paying attention to, right? So you look at a case, you in the depth way to get all the information that you need, right? Collecting multiple data to help you to maybe understand the case or describe the case. Granite theory is just developing a theory, right, about a process, a behavior, a concept. So your end product will be a theory, right? You develop a theory to explain a process or a behavior, maybe a concept or an issue. Lastly, ethnography is all about, exploring issues that, take place in a natural setting. Maybe in an organization, you just want to explore bullying in an organization, in a workplace. You can do observation, interview participants, interact with them, participate in the process, maybe to collect that information from them. So these are the 5, and I know that by this time you have already identified the approach that you want to use for your proposed study. Is any question coming? I think I saw somebody making a comment. Okay. So if not, we can go on. So thinking about these approaches, let's assume that you already selected your approach, right? So what you have to do is to go into the literature. You can look at the textbook that maybe focus on a specific approach. You can look at articles or studies that use this approach just to learn more about it. How do they use it? What are the unique characteristics of that approach? What are the strengths and weaknesses of those approach, right? The approach that you want to use, and how do they use it, right? I think these are the things that you have to look into when you are reviewing literature or articles to do that. So the next one is, after you have reviewed literature, then you start the writing, right? So you have to write about your approach. So always when you're writing, think about your audience, who is going to read your information, right? So you have to describe what the methodology that you have selected, the approach that you have selected. What is that approach all about? Look at the purpose of your study, right? So if the purpose of your study is to focus on examining the experience of participants, then the best approach would be phenomenological approach, right? Maybe you want to develop an explanation concerning an issue, maybe granite theory, right? And then you have to tell your audience why you think it's appropriate. And then sometimes you could talk about philosophical assumptions and paradigm that inform the selected approach. And then you can cite sources, right?
I do. So, I have a question about this. Well, yes. I think that's an area that needs some further discussion. In multiple proposals that I've read, not necessarily from our course, but just over time, serving on committees, there are times, particularly in qualitative research, when there's some confusion around the research design and the philosophical paradigm and assumptions. Can you talk about how to keep those clear and how to distinguish between those?
Yeah, so the philosophical paradigm, think about this as a belief or worldview that is used or practiced for among a specific kind of research community, right? So when we all maybe research community or maybe a field. So when you look at qualitative research community, the main paradigm that we use is called interpretative paradigm. So we believe that there is multiple point of view about issues. So we don't believe in one truth. Any issue that is reality can be looked at from multiple points of view, because individually we have our own individual experience. And then even when an issue happened, even right now, and then somebody want to interview us, what happened? Because of your past experience, it will influence the way you see things. So we're gonna have multiple interpretation of the same issue that happened, right? So under the interpretative paradigm, you have various types. You have constructivism, social constructivism. We have transformative one. So normally what happens is that when you want to find out participant perception about specific experience, most of the time you can use maybe social constructivist paradigm, because they believe that there is any information, any knowledge that comes, or any knowledge that has come into existence is based on the social interaction. So a student, if you are maybe using a specific research approach, you could look into articles that have used that approach and see the kind of paradigm that they use, and you can adopt those paradigm or one of the paradigm and use it to inform your approach. But sometimes the reason why I always try to tell students that it's a little bit optional is that
whenever you choose a qualitative approach, there is already an assumption that you are working within a paradigm of having multiple multiple truth. You don't have one truth, you have multiple truth. So I think that because of that, sometimes students don't really talk about paradigm because we are assuming that if they choose any of the five, but apart from that, there are specific paradigm that the student can choose to inform or connect to a specific approach that they use. Some of the approach like participatory, maybe action research, because you are involving participants to solve their own problem. Most of the time, researchers use transformative paradigm. Transformative paradigm, those people believe that it's very important to involve participants to help them solve the problem and then emancipate them from their the problem that they find themselves in, right? So the essence, the end product of doing the research working within this paradigm is to focus on people who are being marginalized and then involve them in like maybe helping them to know the specific problem they are facing and then helping them to come up with solutions so that at the end of the research, your research will directly impact their lives, right? So in this case, you can say that you are using transformative paradigm. So there's a little bit of debate concerning whether it's needed for you as a researcher to describe the paradigm because it's a general assumption that when you're using a qualitative approach, there are three main assumptions that everybody will think about that, okay, there's multiple, there's not a, there's no single truth, and your past experience influence how you see things, and every finding should be based on context, because without knowing the context, you will not be able to better understand the findings. So this kind of three issues is assumed that, when you're using qualitative approaches, you have to have. So it all depends on the requirement. If a student is required to talk about philosophical paradigm that inform the approach, yes, you can select one of them that are consistent or that is consistent with the approach that you're using, and then you can use it to connect that. And I'm hoping I've addressed your question. I think it's
yes,
a difficult topic. You're welcome.
Yes,
it's a very difficult topic, and I talk a little bit about it in my book that I'll talk the chapter 1 of my qualitative analysis book, and how to incorporate that in your analysis. Okay, so in this, for the qualitative research method, these are the resources that you can look into. These are a few ones that I always recommend to students. And so if you want to, if it's an article, then you can email me and I can send you that article. If it's a book, then you can have to have access to the book. That would be helpful to you. Yeah. So the next one is data source. So you have to think about, based on the methodology, the participant, you can choose participant as a data source. You can think about maybe collecting documents or artifacts, or you can look into maybe a specific physical location or organization. And sometimes you can use social media, online platform, right? And to collect your data to help you address your research question that you have. So when you are reviewing the literature on that, you kind of look into the specific approach. So you look based on the specific approach that you are using, what common data source that students use, right? To not student, researchers use to access data to help them address their research question. For phenomenology, most of the time you have to interview participants. For case study, you can analyze documents and also maybe interview participants. Ethnography, you have to go to the physical location sometimes and observe and maybe participate in what you are doing. So based on that approach, you choose the specific data source. And you also have to think, what is the appropriate sample size? When it comes to qualitative study, we don't have a specific method to determine the sample size. It's based on a recommendation of qualitative researchers and maybe previous studies that has been done and be using that approach. So it can help you to decide the number of participants. What is the recommended sampling strategy, right? And also what is the best practice in terms of recruiting participants for your study? And these are the things that you have to look for when you are reviewing literature to help you identify best practices and adopt some of the best practices to use for the presentation of the data sources. Is there any question coming? Okay, so if not, we can go to the next one. So in describing the data source, your audience or your readers want you to talk about specific data source. So maybe if it's participant, what kind of participant do you want to select, right? To what is the selection criteria? What qualifies a person to be part of your study, right? So what is the sampling strategy? Are you going to use purposive sampling? Are you going to use random sampling? Are you going to use the one that you have to talk to somebody and the person also recommends somebody for your snowball sampling? How are you going to assess participants? And then you can also cite sources to support the decisions or the actions that you're going to take. And then in terms of the number of participants for your study, it all depends, right? So it could be 1 participant, it could be 15 participants, it could be 30 participants, it could be 100 participants, it could be 200 participants. It all depends. So based on our approach, you look at existing studies. So if, let's say, the granite theory, how many participants do researchers normally use? Maybe 15, maybe 20, right? You have to find out and then use that, literature to support your decision. So maybe you read through literature on granite theory and you realize that most of the time they use maybe 15 to 20 participants or 12 to 15 participants. And based on that, this is the number that you're going to use. Also, based on the recommendation of qualitative researchers, when you look at textbook, what do they recommend, right? And also it depends on the homogeneity of participant background. So if participant, let's assume a participant has passed through the same experience like earthquake, right? And they have similar background in terms of maybe education, the income and other background information, there's high probability that they can give you similar stories because the background are similar, right? But if they have diverse background, an earthquake happened at the same place, they might give maybe if you want to find out the impact of the earthquake on their livelihood, people who are rich may see the impact might be different from people who are low income, right? So in this case, if you are focusing on background that are diverse, it's very important to have more participants so that you can get into the deep understanding of the issue, right? It also depends on accessibility. When the issue that you are focusing on is sensitive, there is high probability that you may have less participants because most of the time people don't want to share their personal experience with you as a researcher. So it also can affect the numbers and also saturation, reaching a stage where no new information is being collected. You can reach saturation at a maybe 12th participant or the 10th participant or the 20th participant, right? It also depends on the time and resources. If you don't have time, especially when you're doing dissertation, and you might not be able to interview 20 participants, right? So you have to take into into consideration that too. And also the potential, adequacy of the potential data to address the research question. You have to, make sure that the information that you are collecting for participants will definitely help you to address your research question. Can one participant help you to address your research question? Can 2 participants? Can 20 participants help you? So I have a PowerPoint on that you can click on when you get.
Doc, can I jump in on this one too with the sample size?
Yes.
And these are excellent points. And what I find is that sometimes, particularly as this is a new experience for students, that many times that what I see in qualitative proposals is low numbers for the sample size because textbooks say that, but low numbers that are more related to students' level of comfort with this and feeling, and really, I think more focused on, I'm going to use snowball sampling. So talk to people that I know and ask them to tell me other people, and I can probably get 5 people to talk to me. And so what I love about what you're saying here and why we're connecting this to literature review is that even in deciding how many people should be a part of your study, that should be grounded in literature, right? So these 7 things that he's talking about here, all of those are things you can find in the annotations that you're doing this week. All those are things that you should be doing as part of your literature review to understand how do you situate your study in the context of previous research on this topic. And one other thing I think is really important when you're talking about what these participants are like, right? So if you are going to talk to, and let's use nurses, since we've been having this issue with lots of nursing research in this class. So if you're going to use nurses and you're going to talk to just nurses in general that live in Florida, if there are 10,000 nurses in Florida and that's the only criteria that you have is that you have to be a nurse and in Florida, and you tell me you're only going to talk to 3, that doesn't seem to match up to me, right? So if your criteria is large enough, then why aren't you talking to more people to help? Now, conversely, if you said I want to talk to nurses who are Latino American, who have a PhD in business, and who only went to the Ivy League schools, now your criteria is different, right? And so it changes what the possible population is. So what we might expect a smaller sample size. But everything here is about supporting that with literature. And in either way we talk about here, you have to support that from literature.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that if you are not doing a quantitative study, you shouldn't make your population too broad, because for quantitative study, you are trying to generalize, right? So that's why you make it broad. But a qualitative study, you want to really focus on specific group of people, so that when you collect the data, you can also assess their background, because without knowing a lot about their background, you might not be able to better understand the information that you're going to collect from them, right? So if you say nurse is located in Florida, you're going to get a lot of information, but if you don't try to narrow it down a little bit, that information finding that you're going to get cannot be generalized to the whole nurses in Florida. So it's very important for you to narrow down your the people that you're collecting, so that you can collect a lot of information about their background, so that it helps you to better understand what they say and what they talk to you about. So, and all these things, you can get that information from literature, and that will, there are a lot of literature that will give you information about steps that you have to take to assess the right participant for your study, and then you can adopt that kind of best practices for you to use. So thank you, Dr. Morris, for emphasizing on this. So in terms of resources, I have them here. As I said, if you it's an article, you can email me and I can send you the article that was listed here. Okay, then, so the next one is the data collection. Then you can see the data collection strategy. So you can use interview, you can do a document collection, you can do observation, focus groups, and web scraping, especially if you are using it, maybe social media, Twitter. You can use a tool to retrieve all the information that you need, and then you can use, analyze. So when you're looking at the literature, you have to look into, so based on the approach that you have collected, what is the common data collection strategy they use? Phenomenological approach, most of the time interview, maybe focus groups. Ethnography, maybe most of the time observation, and maybe artifact collection, and maybe interview, some of them. So based on that, you also have to look into what is the right way that they use those the strategy. What is the best way that they use, or what is the best practice surrounding the strategy that you have selected? What are the strengths and weaknesses, right? Their strengths, especially focus groups. The one weakness is that the information that the participants are going to discuss within the group, you as a researcher don't have control over, in case one of the participants want to spread the information to outsiders, right? So when it comes to maybe sensitive issue, maybe focus group might not be the best, right? Maybe individual one-on-one communication will be the best way, right? So another thing that you have to think about is what specific tools that you can use to collect your data and store the data that you have. You can get an example from all in the literature, and also what things, actions, measures that can be taken to protect participants' rights in terms of their privacy and confidentiality, right? And then when you're describing it, you have to present the data collection process in a chronological order. You want your audience to follow the steps that you are presenting, right? So maybe you start with, after the recruiting of participants, maybe you give them the consent form, you explain it to them, they use that information, they ask questions, and after asking the questions and they are clear with everything and they want to participate, then they sign a consent form, and then you collect data from them. Maybe you can start with demographic information, and then you can end with the main interview questions, and then you tell your audience about the amount of time for each participant you're going to spend, maybe an hour or 30 minutes, depending on the information you're going to ask them and how you're going to store the information. So try to present in a detailed chronological order so that readers will not be confused, so that they don't have to, future researchers don't have to contact you for you to explain the process. They can go through the process and do what you did, right? That's what you want to do, present. So these are the resources for you that you can use. And I think the time is going, so I have to quickly talk about data analysis. This data analysis part, there are two types. They have, research method based, this strategy, and also generic way. So the research method based is the one where there's a specific step-by-step process that you have to analyze on the data that is connected to a specific approach. So let's say you are using interpretative phenomenological approach. There are steps that you have to follow, that you have to use to analyze your data. Maybe you are doing using transcendental phenomenological approach. Maybe you are using granite theory. There are specific steps that you have to take that is different from the general steps that you have to take. So you have to note that. And they have a generic one. The generic one is just the one that normally most researchers use, right? Irrespective of the approach. Maybe they start with the they have two types. We have inductive process and then deductive. Inductive means that you develop the themes or the codes as you go through the data, right? One of the examples is the thematic analysis. You go through the data, you identify themes, and then or identify codes, right? And they have the deductive process, where you develop codes or themes before you go through your data so that you can use the themes that you have developed to connect to the significant information you identify in the data. And sometimes you have to modify the themes or the codes that you originally developed. So one example is using content analysis, right? I have PowerPoint. You can click on that to get more information. And then I just, for my book, I use the inductive data analysis steps, and then I have them here. So you start with coding, and there are three main types. Because of time, I cannot go through everything, but my book, in case in the later you want to analyze your qualitative data, then you can access my book. So it also talks about categorizing, grouping the codes that you developed. We have different types. We also, after grouping them and developing themes, you can connect them, right? You can find out whether there's a concurrent relationship or chronological relationship or causal relationship between them. It's not a causal relationship in the quantitative study. It's a causal for the qualitative. So it's a little bit different. And then the way that you have to communicate your findings, I have that information in the book. So, and these are the resources for you to help you to talk about data analysis. So in conclusion, when your methodology related decision and actions are anchored to literature, your research plan is more likely to be well structured, right? Because you have read literature, the way you present information, everybody will know that you know what you are talking about. You communicate that information well because you have learned from previous studies, and then people will believe what you come up with, because most of the information that you communicated are based on what previous researchers have done. So, and you are more likely to be aware of the implications of your decision. So because you already read literature, you know that, okay, if I take this action, this is what is going to happen, because researcher A took the similar action and this is what they got, right? So you'll be well informed, and you'll be able to also justify that information to your audience. People are going to ask you, why did you take this decision? Okay, you can say that, oh, this researcher did similar thing, and that's why I'm taking that decision. So this is what I have, these references that I use for this presentation. I think I sent the PowerPoint to Dr. Morris, and he was, I don't know, I think he was share that information with you. If you want to contact me, this is my contact information, and for you to discuss your methodology, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, we are happy to help you to be able to make very informed decisions and help you to finish your dissertation when you start working on it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andu. I appreciate this, and I hope that it really helps clarify some things. So I want to open it up for some questions and or comments right now from students. Does silence mean there's nothing? And that's okay. No pressure, just asking. So in case you're speaking, you might be on mute. Go ahead, Brenda.
No, I think we're good. I thank you for walking us through your process. I think it helps connect the dots more, because when we're in class, sometimes it can feel a little theory-ish. And then when you have Professor Lonnie, beating us over the head with the tick marks, it can, you can get lost in the weeds. But the PowerPoint that you gave that ties it all in together definitely helped.
You're welcome. I'm happy that this one helped. And when you click on the slide share, I have a lot of PowerPoint from writing your chapter 3 to analyzing your qualitative data using a software to do that. So I have a lot of resources online for all of you. Yeah. So thank you.
All right. Oh, and Jennifer says, thank you very much. Oh, wait, let me make sure I read it correctly. Jennifer says, thank you so much. Very helpful. When she took lots of screenshots of the references. I have the slides. I'm actually going to post them in the class with the recording. And it's the last thing I'd like, Dr. Adu. Can you send us the link, your preferred link for where we can purchase your book?
Yes, so when you go to Amazon and okay, so let me see, I can send you my book.
And I asked that because I know sometimes there's a preference, whether if you want to buy it through Amazon or through the actual publisher itself.
Yeah, the publisher, you get 20% off from the publisher. So you can get 20% off, or you can, get, if you want to get it faster, then Amazon will be the best. So okay. I have it here too, so.
Great. Oh, and Amanda says great because she was going to ask if we have access to the presentation. Absolutely. It says thank you. So I will post the recording and the presentation and the preferred link to Dr. Adu's book.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Let me post a preferred link before we go, so in case somebody want to click on it. I think I have the second one from the publisher. You just have to compare and see which one you prefer getting it from. So, and also thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. And Dr. Morris, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to your students.
Absolutely. We will be in touch. Thank you so much for your time this evening and for helping them with clarity, and for all of the students who chair or even serve on the committee that you've been helping over time as well. I appreciate you.
You're welcome.